We get quite a few of requests for processes and all that sort of stuff, but it's also important that we structure our own work to make sure that we work in an area where we get the biggest bang for our buck.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with process practitioners, experts, specialists, those that are putting BPM into practice day in and day out. If you are joining us for the first time, warm welcome to you. This is episode we're getting close to episode 200. So we're in episodes 170, 180. I don't know the exact number. And if you are joining us again, maybe you're a long-time listener, welcome back. It's so good to have you with us. If you could give us a rating or a review on the platform that you're listening to this on, that's only going to help us continue to get this message out to a wider audience. We received fantastic feedback around this podcast and the education that we're able to provide. I've had many people approach me saying that they have jumped into the fields of business process management because of the podcast, or they've stuck around in the field because of the podcast, that their network has been broadened. They've been able to connect with other people that are in this space. And I think that's one of the powerful things about a platform like this, is being able to learn and glean from those that are a few steps ahead of the journey from where you are. And I know that there have been many organizations and many people that are represented organizations on this show. I've certainly gleaned so much across all of these episodes, and I know a bunch of you guys have as well. But without further ado, let's jump in today's episode. I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Erik Sodergren. Now, Erik is the head of operational excellence at Babcock, Australasia, I believe. Very excited for this conversation. Erik, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
So obviously you're heavily involved in the operational excellence side of Babcock and the work that you've been doing. You've been, as we were having a bit of a conversation beforehand, you've been brought in to really establish this arm of the business and communicate to the business why you do what you do and what it is that you do. So can you take us on a bit of a journey over the past couple of years, talking to us about why you were established in the role you are established in, and what's the function that the operational excellence team is serving there at Babcock?
Sure. So I've been in Babcock for approximately 2 years. I started as the first sort of official recruit, I guess, in the team. The reason we put the team together and Babcock's been investing in this space over the past few years is I think there is a growing understanding and increased awareness, I guess, across the organization of the value of processes and process excellence and everything that we do and can bring to the table. So I started 2 years ago, hired the first person, I think, within 2 or 3 months, and we're close to 30 people now in the team. So not specifically in operational excellence, all of us. Well, we are in operational excellence, but not in process management. We have some people looking after other parts of as well as the BMS, the business management system. We do some asset management and a few other bits and pieces, but majority of the team members are in the process excellence sort of space. So yeah, that's how the background.
That's fantastic. And I know that there are many people listening to this episode that are in an organization where operational excellence or business process management is also a new function that they're getting off the ground. How has it been received? I'd imagine for some people in the organization, it's communicating to them the value of it and the purpose of it, and almost making them aware that you're here and you exist. What has that communication been like? What have you been communicating to the wider business?
Well, I think the initial was just making people aware of what operational excellence is, and that we have a team that actually is going to hopefully help you improve the way you do your day-to-day job. and I think overall been really positive. I think it's almost to the extent that as we've grown the team, it's more or less putting process in place internally in operational excellence to make sure that we have a proper pipeline of initiatives, and that we are getting the information in a organized way. Because as we raise the awareness, we get quite a few requests for processes and all that sort of stuff, which is really positive. But it's also important that we structure our own work to make sure that we work in an area where we get the biggest bang for our buck. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people are aware of, we're listening to you. We don't want to be in a position where people don't raise anything to us. We want to be able to be seen to be listening to everyone. And so that's a bit of almost like, to some degree, we have to just shift a little bit that, we'll listen to you, but maybe we're going to do your initiative next year, but we'll promise we're going to get back to you to some degree. So it's been really positive, and as we're growing it across the business.
That's great. That's great. And how do you define where to start? Because as you're saying, as you raise that awareness and communicate across the board, more people are going to be coming to you to leverage that expertise, that experience, that's the practitioners that are part of your team. How do you triage that in a meaningful way where you are focusing on as you say, the biggest bang for your buck?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit depends on. We have some numerous important contracts with various customers. In certain cases, there may be sort of we just have to do this, we just have to do that. So we help those contracts with that. But if it's sort of if that's not the case, and it's just a matter of an improvement, we traditionally take a sort of Lean Six Sigma approach to where we start. So we'll work through the analysis and see, well, this would be an area that makes more sense to start in. We focus on that area versus, and we'll do this next year as an example. So I think when in doubt, Lean Six Sigma always works. That's the message.
And would you say that there's been quite a very much a light bulb moment for a lot of people where they now have visibility and transparency on what they're doing compared to before?
Yeah, I think it's in some areas where we've been more active or active for a longer period of time, they would have a greater understanding of the benefits as we sort of grow across other divisions within the company. So, and that, yes, absolutely, it's like that. But it's to the same what I said before. It's important that we can still work through, because as the people are getting more and more aware of what we can do, we do tend to get more and more requests left, right, and center, which is positive. But it's also important that we make sure that we actually, and I will always keep telling the team that we're better off doing less things really well than doing many things sort of half done, because that's not the road we want to go down. So I think it's important that we focus on areas where we know we can complete work and it can be a good outcome, rather than try to do too much.
Yes, yeah. And from what you were saying before we jumped into today's conversation, you're not there to take on all of the work from the different areas of business. You're more there as a supporting or enablement arm. How does that relationship work when you're I'd imagine empowering and enabling the different areas to work on their own initiatives, and you're supporting that, as opposed to being a bottleneck where people are waiting on you to optimize or improve the work that they're doing?
Yeah, so I think we're working quite hard with everyone to sort of explain and get the message across where, we don't have any processes. I think we have our internal process, but the business processes don't belong to us. We're not the process owner of them. And we just, we're facilitating and helping the various businesses to streamline or improve their processes. We don't own the processes. So I think we're trying really hard to get that message is always clear to individuals and the team members, then I think it's one of the where I've seen in the past where you tend to take on too much work and take too much responsibility of various processes or process improvement, because if that actually is the case, it's really difficult to then hand things over to the business. And it's also, people look at it and say, well, actually, this is not really right. And you've done, like, well, if you go down that road, it just becomes a very, very difficult to sell. And it's also difficult to get things to sort of change and stick. So you need to have that initial collaboration, and that process owner need to be really clear on, this is my process and I'm owning it, and you're just helping me with a process management tool, you're just helping me with this or that, or but I'm responsible for this process and I would like it to be improved, and you can help me with that. So that's really the message we want to get across.
Yeah, I can see that working very well. I know that in the number of organizations that I've been talking with, sometimes the challenge is that, people are subject matter experts and various operational people are quite resistant to someone coming in and telling them how they need to do their job or how they need to change what they're doing. And oftentimes that's met with some resistance, a feeling of, well, who are you to tell me what to do? You're not in this position, you're not in this role, you don't understand all the ins and outs of the work that I'm doing. And so being able to enable them or enable them to take ownership of that work, to be like, hey, you're in the position, you know better than us what's working well, what's not working well, identifying opportunities for improvement there. And then when you do make those changes, I can only imagine how much that's going to benefit from an ownership point of view, because they're not owning something that's been sort of thrust onto them, but they're owning something that they've come up with themselves.
Absolutely. So that's sort of, if I look back over the 20 years I've been in this field, the number of times I've heard, you don't know this process, or we know it better than you. Like that's happened all the time. So I've sort of I've stopped doing that now, because you really, there's no point of trying to do it that way. And so now it's sort of, if I ever, then my message is more like, well, I don't need to know the process because you're here in the room. So don't you know your process? So, and I can then ask all the stupid questions, then that make the person think slightly differently. So I think the unless you got that clear up front, it's just very, very difficult to get anything through and stick in the organization. So I think the message always need to be that, you need to be responsible. It's very important that the process owner is fully across the role of the process owner. It's really important that they understand that this is my process and take ownership of it. And because I think if that's not really clear, it's just impossible in the long run to actually make it sustainable improvements to any system or process.
Yeah. And I find that sometimes there is a resistance to being the person responsible or accountable for a particular process. And what does that actually mean? What does that look like? What are the ramifications of that? What's the journey been like there in defining and establishing process ownership? Has it evolved and changed over time, or is there a pretty concrete standard as to the responsibilities of a process owner?
It's pretty, in this organization, we work with quite strict, under strict customer in certain places, contracts and constraints. And it's pretty much clear in a lot of ways who should be the responsible owner for certain processes. So that hasn't really been a big problem. I think the ownership, who's the owner, is not potentially been a problem at all. But I think the main problem is more along the lines but want to improve, and like in all cases, to get people to try to improve a process. That could be the traditional challenges, so people are happy with the way things are, or they believe that the process is already sort of pretty well defined and set and improved, as an example. So sometimes it could be a challenge to get people to see a slightly different way of doing things, but in terms of ownership, that's been pretty good in this so far in this organization.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that the ones that you've communicated to and they understand your function and the role that you're playing, they're now enabled or equipped to identify opportunities and or at least understand that we don't have to do the same thing that we've always done. We can actually look for improvements and opportunities for change and make sure that we've got the operational excellence team to support us and enable us with this. How do you balance a reactive approach versus a proactive approach? Because I'd imagine that there would be some process owners that you communicate to and they're 100% on board right from the start. Yes, this makes sense. I've got a lot of opportunities for improvement that I'm already well aware of. I want the ball to start moving straight away. And then you'd have other people that maybe it takes them a little bit longer. Other process owners, it takes a little bit longer for them to understand the function, how it works. Maybe they've never been in an organization where they've had that support from that function. So how do you balance and obviously you were talking about where's the biggest bang for your buck, how do you prioritize processes? How do you balance the more reactive approach to what's being sent to you versus a proactive approach where maybe you have better visibility on the end-to-end operational sort of end-to-end process experience from start to end. So you would have a different perspective on, well, if we optimize this area of the business from an end-to-end perspective, that doesn't make sense right now. Or if we make improvements in this pocket of the business, and that's actually going to impact things upstream or downstream. It's actually not just an isolated initiative. It's going to break out into a much bigger project that we need to work on. How do you sort of balance that reactive and proactive approach? Is that how you would see that, or do you see that in a different way?
Yeah, so I think part of that is we do take a quite using the change management ADKAR model across the team, and I think, well, in that example, using the awareness and desire, the two first cornerstones of the model, I think people are arriving at the desire stage in different pace. So everyone adopts differently to a change. So the awareness, they may absorb that. Everyone will absorb it differently, and the desire you'll get to that at a different stage as well. So I think certain people understand the desire, to your point, straight away, and I understand I'm fully on board. I need to get on the race, and then you work through that. Other people need to be worked more to get on the desire journey, I guess you can say. So depending on the individual, it's hard to sort of use one model and repeat that over and over, and need to be tailored, I guess, to the individuals to some degree. And because, people absorb the message slightly different and may look at it a different way, and they may not understand certain things. And when you work through that bit, they will eventually, I guess, get to the desire stage or fully understand why this change is needed. But I think it's important to, when we communicate, to communicate the whole message, not only a snippet, I guess, for that individual. Say, well, actually, if we work in this area here, we'll do improvements downstream. When we are looking at processes as well in the system and do process simulations, which we can do, people can sort of see the impact of a change upstream or downstream, and sell the message that way as well. So I think it's slightly different method may be needed for well, it's always the case, like it's not one sort of model fits everyone. So you just need to be listening and make sure that sort of change management is fully embedded in everything we do. And that normally is the biggest hurdle, because often doing sort of process improvement in one sense is actually not that difficult, but getting people to change is the challenge. So that's why we sort of put a lot of focus on the change management.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think at the end of the day, you're working with people, and I think that sometimes as process practitioners, we could be so focused on the technical elements of capturing the data, capturing the information, without maybe giving less emphasis to where at the end of the day we are liaising, we are talking, we are communicating and collaborating with other people. So everyone has their own motivators and drivers and pain points and reasons for changing and reasons for not changing and things like that. So I think that's really important. If you could go back 2 years to the start of this journey, what would you tell yourself? Would you do anything differently?
That's a good question. I think I think we have developed some pretty good internal tools now, and how we are sort of doing process improvement, and how we are sort of structuring the internal resourcing within the team, and how we manage the pipeline. Maybe that's something that would have been beneficial to done from day one. But there were so many other things that to do at day one, so it's wasn't really time to do it. But I think those sort of tools would have been handy to have back then. But overall, I think the journey has been pretty good.
That's good. No, that's really good. And I think promising and encouraging for the audience to hear that, that you can, if you get the right ingredients in place, get the foundations in place from the start, it can be it doesn't have to have as many hurdles and obstacles and challenges as maybe some people have experienced in the past. And now looking towards the future, what does the future of operational excellence look like in the short term, which I would imagine is well understood by you and your team, and what you're going after, your goals and strategic objectives? And also, what does operational excellence look like in the long term? Do you see certain trends or a shift happening where there's going to be a change in focus in the long-term future?
Yeah, good question. I think for us over the next little while is to continue the rollout of the tools and processes that we have that we put in place to do the work. I think we also like to slowly but surely educate the wider team outside of operational excellence how to do small process improvements themselves. So, and this could be, do we want more Lean Six Sigma black belts in the business, embedded in the business, rather than having them in within their team of operational excellence? Is that one sort of approach I was sort of thinking a little bit about? So ideally, we always sort of say in this particular field, you want to work yourself out of a job. You want to make sure that people just do, this as the day job. That may never happen, but we do want to be able to provide less of a service and more of a mentoring, I guess, and get people to do more of this sort of stuff themselves. I think for the future, I'm sort of trying to sort of understand more, but I would imagine it'd be more and more AI types in our field, and how things that back in the day took a really long time to do when we do analysis, how that can now be speeded up, help of like ChatGPT and that sort of stuff. But I think you can only get so far in that space, because what we said before, the change management is always going to be in the people that we work with is going to be the challenge. So some elements of a project may be sped up by all those different tools, but you're still going to have the person that's going to say, well, what do you guys know? I've been here for 50 years, and and that sort of challenge is still going to be there. So that's where I think the human aspect is going to be hard to get rid of completely. But I think the future looks quite exciting in a lot of ways.
Definitely, yeah. And I think as there's only going to be more and more data to process and to consume and to understand. And I think, as you're saying, the different technologies and artificial intelligence helping us to be able to understand what's going on at a much faster rate. And I think it's going to maybe change, put pressure on people in terms of their mindset. And, I feel like we'll be moving into a realm of a lot more visibility, a lot more transparency, a lot more, not being able to hide from what's actually going on. Because at the end of the day, for our organizations to improve, we need to be able to understand clearly, well, where are we? Where do we want to go? And what's the current gap in between? And so I think that visibility and transparency, I think, is only going to increase and get more and more. And so we're going to, it's going to maybe refine the work that we do and compliance and a whole range of different topics like that as well. So, but Erik, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me and having this conversation today. I think it's been very insightful and great that, as I mentioned at the start, it's always good to be able to sit down with someone that is day in and day out doing this and putting this into practice and in place. And I think there's a lot that other people can glean from you and the journey that you've been on so far. You've had quite a bit of success in such a short amount of time, I would say. And so I think there's a lot that people can glean from the journey that you've been on. So I just want to thank you for sitting down with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.